How do you know when a story's gone wrong? I don't mean when the writing falls apart or the budget runs out. I mean when a story's gone wrong. When words don't line up like they should. When it feels like the pages are taunting you. When you realize that language isn't safe anymore. In the Factory, a 2013 novel by Hiroyuki Oyamada, things go very wrong. But they don't start that way. The book follows 3 new employees at a massive factory producing something. The factory. One is a recent college grad, happy that her education has gotten her a real job, the kind college grads are supposed to get. Another, a botanist, takes a gig green roofing the place. It pays better than academia, after all. The third, a temp worker, is just happy to have a paycheck. Each of them comes in with not dreams, per se, but hopes, a goal. They do not find this. The graduate ends up shredding paper 7.5 hours a day. The botanist mostly hangs out with moss. The temp proofreads documents and tries not to fall asleep. The factory is not really subtle about what it's going for. It's about the meaninglessness of modern work, characters performing nonsense jobs in a giant office. But unlike other stories about this kind of corporate hell, as the story progresses, the factory only gets more opaque. In Severance, characters discover truths, discover their identity. In Control, faced with redacted documents and an infinite bureaucracy, we still take, well. But in the factory, our characters never find their moment. The graduate, going mildly insane after hundreds of hours of shredding paper, tells us, even if it doesn't bring me any pleasure, at least I'm making some sort of living. I've been fortunate, beyond blessed. I have to accept that. So what if there's something in the way? I'm sure work is like that for everyone. I can't always act like a spoiled child. These characters, faced with their own hero's journey, simply don't take the bait. And what the factory supposes, what makes it stick in my mind, is that when each of these characters gives up and refuses to cross the threshold, their story begins to break. Something you notice immediately when you pick up the factory is that it doesn't look right. There are no headers at the start of each chapter to tell us which character we're following, no line breaks between dialogue. It's as if the novel heard complaints about walls of text and took it as a challenge. This lack of punctuation, combined with incredibly specific descriptions of mundane food and tasks, means that The Factory can be a difficult novel to read. But it also means that you won't immediately notice when things start to break in more drastic ways. In one scene, the graduate is in a cafe, overhearing her brother have lunch with his girlfriend. But as we go through page and page of discussions of pork and companies and the job market, rambling and rambling and rambling, she took a bite, added more sauce, and took another bite, even though it already had umeboshi inside. I think it like it better with bulldog sauce. What was my brother thinking getting involved with this hideous freak? But yeah, it's basically a big rat. Good morning, morning. It was raining, but the basement was the same as ever. Always the same temperature, same humidity, muffled man-made air. The first time, I didn't notice the scene change from outdoor cafe to basement office space. It was only a few sentences later, the conversation wasn't making sense anymore, that I realized something had gone wrong. This, 60 pages in, is where The Factory reveals itself. It is a story about words slipping by without you noticing, about getting 5 years older and forgetting why that makes you so sad. It only breaks more from here.
The father of relativity was a great master of visualization. All his ideas about space and time had been born from his capacity to imagine himself in the most extreme physical circumstances. For this reason, he was unwilling to accept the restrictions demanded by Heisenberg, who seemed to have gouged out both his eyes in order to see further.
Benjamin Labatou's 2021 novel, When We Cease to Understand the World, is more grounded in reality than The Factory. That doesn't make it any less weird. The book follows the lives of various scientists, mostly early 20th century, as they wrestle with the implications of their discoveries. The first chapter, for example, tracks Fritz Haber, the father of ammonia fertilizer, a massive boost to food production, and the father of chemical warfare, of chlorine gas. Labatou is focused on the madness of scientific discovery, the sacrifice and the guilt, and he finds his perfect subject in Werner Karl Heisenberg. From Newton onward, physics had assumed that the universe was like a watch, wound up at the beginning of time and moving in predictable, precise ways. This held true from the motion of planets to the tiniest electron. But, as Labatou writes, Heisenberg understood that to apply concepts of classical physics, such as position, velocity, and momentum, to a subatomic particle was sheer madness. That aspect of nature required a completely new language. And so, he invents it, working by day and by night, roaming the beaches of the Isle of Heligoland, having strange visions in midnight wanderings through the fog. He discards orbits and models for matrices and arrays. Eventually, he does it. He wanders out onto the cliffs of the island, feeling a sense of vertigo from his discoveries. He resists the temptation to throw his papers into the sea, and he sits, dangling his legs over the water, listening to the waves on the rocks below. In September 1925, just over 100 years ago, he publishes this. Or, only slightly more understandably, on the quantum theoretical reinterpretation of kinematical and mechanical relationships. I don't really get Heisenberg's quantum mechanics. I'm a psychology and economics major. But to my credit, most physicists at the time didn't really get it either. Its visions of probabilities and arrays are hard to explain and even harder to visualize. As Labatou writes, the world Heisenberg had discovered was incompatible with common sense. Heisenberg is immediately a star and a target. He expands his ideas, following them to their logical conclusions, theorizing that quantum objects had no fixed identity, but instead dwelt in a space of possibilities, a constant state of uncertainty. You don't have to understand the math here. You don't even have to understand the physics. All you need to know is that Heisenberg's discovery both revolutionized physics and put a part of it forever out of our reach. Sure, we can better understand the functioning of the world, but with quantum mechanics, we can never fully grasp it. What was beyond our grasp was neither the future nor the past, but the present itself. However much we scrutinize the fundamentals, there would always be something vague, undetermined, uncertain. But if we cannot understand the world, if we can't trust atoms, how can we understand anything? Science, philosophy, morals? How can we believe in the idea of history, facts, of nonfiction, of the nonfiction we've been reading? Here are 2 ways to describe when we cease to understand the world.
Wikipedia calls it a historiographical metafiction, which, sure.
The acknowledgements call it a work of fiction based on real events. The quantity of fiction grows throughout the book. Suddenly, we are not watching these scientists spiral. We are spiraling with them. I look back on the first chapter, on Fritz Haber and his chemicals. Which paragraph is it? The one that's fiction. Is it this one? This one? I think I know. I have my suspicions, but I'll never know for certain. And from here, if things only grow more fictitious, more unknowable. I get now why Einstein found Heisenberg's uncertainty principle repulsive. I wish we could go back. I wish we could understand the world again. By the end of The Factory, things are a mess. Perspective switch in the middle of a conversation. A chapter ends, and 15 years pass. The novel's climax, 20 whole pages, are spent describing the ecology and behavior of the lizards and birds that live in the factory. By the end, The Factory feels like a novel that had a plot and then decided it didn't need it, like a novel that's broken. But how else could it have gone? As The Graduate says, everything feels so disconnected. Me and my work, me and the factory, me and society, there's always something in the way. How else could this alienation of modern work be depicted than through a book that breaks apart? Modern work is not a plot, a hero's journey, a wide cast of complex supporting characters. It's waking up, shredding paper 7 hours a day, and not leaving because the job has dental insurance. If work doesn't make sense, a coherent plot is just the next step. In the mountains of Germany, Heisenberg talks to his mentor, Niels Bohr, about how he could ever understand, much less explain, this strange new world he's just beginning to uncover. If a mere particle of dust contains billions of atoms, Bohr says to him, what possible way is there to talk meaningfully of something so small? The physicist, like the poet, should not describe the facts of the world, but rather generate metaphors and mental connections. And so, Heisenberg's discovery of the uncertainty principle, the idea that there is a fundamental limit to what we can truly know about the world, does not come in equations and research. It comes in a dim pub, where the bartender forces Heisenberg to drink and tells him of floods in Mississippi, of the dizziness of the modern world, of the first phone call, of the now constant scream of massacres into his eyes and ears, tells him whom do we owe this magnificent inferno, if not to you, to people like you. It comes when he sprints out of that bar into the foggy night and sees fireflies coalesce into electrons, and then people. Ashy people, victims of a bomb that wouldn't explode until 20 years later, surrounding him and then gone in a flash. This story is probably fiction, probably never happened, but I don't think that matters. Quantum mechanics is numbers and ridiculously complex equations, but it is also this sense of horror and wonder, a feeling like something has come undone, that fiction has bled into fact. When We Cease to Understand the World is not pure nonfiction. And in breaking apart, When We Cease to Understand the World becomes more true to its source material than any nonfiction I've read in years.
Dog Eat Dog is hard to talk about. Part of this is the subject matter. Dog Eat Dog follows two groups on an unnamed Pacific island, natives and occupation. Occupation tries to do old euphemisms, like bringing civilization, expanding the economy. The natives try to hold on. It's a rough story. But it also is hard to talk about, because Dog Eat Dog is a novel, historical metafiction, but a game, a tabletop role-playing game. Here's how it works.
Every game of Dog Eat Dog starts with the players collectively describing the occupation and the natives. Then they make the rules, a list of unspoken assumptions between the two groups. This will grow throughout the game, but at the start, there's just one. It is uncomfortable to roleplay this, to roleplay being lesser because of some rule. The bitter taste of this is only heightened by the fact that the occupation isn't run by the game or a GM, but is instead another player. How do you decide which player gets this role? Which player gets to be unquestionably superior to the rest of the table? It's easy, the game says. The richest player will be the occupation. It's hard to understate how much of a social grenade this is. Generally, people are uncomfortable talking about their own money, even more uncomfortable comparing their money to friends, the friends they've invited to a friendly game night. And look, everyone plays role-playing games for different reasons, but I think the vast majority of people are drawn to them, at least in part, because they like spending time with their friends, and they like being able to tell a collaborative story with them. And that's great. That's why I'm drawn to them. But Dog Eat Dog asks a simple question: whether role-playing would work if the GM wasn't collaborative, but hostile. The answer, disturbingly, is yes, it works. It works too well. You might ask what the difference is between the occupation being run by a player or a GM. The difference is in intent. As designer Liam Lee Wong Burke writes, like the GM, that player has a unique position, a much larger set of characters to have authority over, and individual goals which are at odds with the other players in a way that encourages them to actively seek out conflict. But unlike the GM, there's no implicit assumption that they have everybody's best interests at heart. This assumption doesn't really get noticed in most games. Any GM worth their salt will know that it isn't really about them. It's about the players, about making them feel like the center of attention and like their choices matter. The GM is just a springboard to help them have those experiences. The occupation player, meanwhile, is explicitly focused on making it all about them. They are incentivized by the rules of the game to barge into every scene. While you have to ask to enter, they just do it. And once they've made you angry or upset or forced to compromise an ideal that you thought was rooted deep in your heart, they judge you. They pick what rules you broke, whatever self-respect you asserted, and punish you for it, taking tokens to represent their control over you. Quite frankly, this creates resentment. I didn't blame or hate my friend playing the occupation, but I hated how he made me feel. I hated how his little jabs would get into his skin, and how despite knowing that giving it would only lead to more demands, I still did what he asked, because it was easier than making myself feel like a person. This hostility exists even if the occupation player is avoiding direct brutality. As Burke writes again, it doesn't really matter how cruel or well-meaning you are. Colonization is still about believing your superiority over someone else. It's incredibly difficult to build a functional relationship on that basis, even if both parties are trying as hard as they can. And it's even harder to keep this resentment at bay and keep player and person separate because of the richest rule. Our discussion at my table, of which of the four of us was the richest, was uncomfortable and long. We talked about what richest meant, about how uncomfortable we were, about why we were uncomfortable. And then we watched that arbitrary rule, that he was the richest, turn to an arbitrary rule that he was superior, better than us, and all just sat like bile in our throats. Dog Eat Dog doesn't necessarily end in death, although for one of my friends it did. For me, it ended in compromise. The occupation was gone, my family was still alive, and I hated that I was too. And that's Dog Eat Dog, a game that breaks the GM, and instead of making the story fall apart, makes it all too real. I don't think I enjoyed playing Dog Eat Dog, but to be fair, I don't know if I enjoyed the factory or when we cease to understand the world. There's something wrong about these stories, more than just the way they break their genre. There's an infection. Whether it's capitalism or science or colonialism, these stories try to pack huge ideas into their pages and tear apart in the process. They are fascinating and unpleasant, and fascinating in the ways they are unpleasant. They're 3 stories that are broken. They're 3 stories I can't stop thinking about.